You ready to move on to philosophy?
Sure.
Let's get philosophical.
Okay.
And Will mentioned that as well, because of your style of coaching and the way you approach the team. I wanted to talk about egoless coaching, putting your ego aside as a coach and not to be overbearing, overbracing, and letting the players be. How do you approach, and how do you feel that you can be still your authentic and your own self while coaching without being stepped on? Because I think that's the biggest approach, biggest fear, I think, of young coaches, especially, where you have to put your ego aside and not to be a control freak. And you're trying to project the nice side of you, right? So it kind of gets responded back to you, and it's kind of a give and take. But it's like one bad apple can ruin the whole deal. So I'm wondering how you implement this egoless coaching, and how do you deal when players are trying to test you and overstep the line? Because there's certainly without mentioning names, I don't like to mention names on my podcast, but when there's players that approach and try to step the line, how do you deal with that?
How long do we have on the podcast? This is a lifelong journey, with lots of learnings and mistakes along the way, and continual learning. And it's maybe I'll jump forward to one of the things in the third or fourth quarter, which is about continual questions you ask yourself, or growth, or whatever. And the thing that I keep saying now is, the player, like, I keep getting older, but the players keep staying the same age. So, how do I continue to keep that, relationship with them? And am I still relevant? But in terms of building, so again, this is a long answer. So if you get bored, or think your listeners are going to get bored, please interject and put me in a different direction. But so again, in terms of my journey, I started my first professional head coaching job, and as is normally the case when you get a head coaching opportunity, you take over a team that's struggling. It's rare that the team that wins the championships fires the coach and brings in someone as a first-year head coach, right? And so you're going to take a team that's struggling. I walked into a tough situation, and we were bad. And in my first year, we were on a 10-game losing streak. Thankfully, I had a good owner. Most owners would have fired me. And of course, in that, you're getting young coach, you're getting lots of advice, and everybody's giving you stuff. And again, I played for Brian Goorjian, and he's a pretty demanding coach, and he's the most winningest coach in the Australian league. And people were always, oh, Brian would do it like this, and Brian would do it like that. And then I started trying to be harder, and I'd yell at people, and I found over time, like in the reviews at the end of the year, that the players, the feedback that I got from the players was that they weren't happy, they didn't like the way I was coming across, and that the relationship just wasn't there. And as I thought about myself, it's like, it's not who I am. That's not me. I'm false when I'm trying to do that. I'm trying to be somebody I'm not. And so my first bit of advice is, like, regardless of what I say, what anybody else says, you have to be yourself. Like, your personality is your personality. If you are a screamer and yeller, be a screamer and yeller. If you're not a screamer and yeller, don't be a screamer and yeller. Like, obviously somewhere in there you find the bits, you got to mold a little bit this way, a little bit that way, depending on the situation, the personnel. But be who you are, because the players players know when you're genuine, and when you're, like, they sense when you're faking stuff, and that's when they take advantage or you lose the trust. That's the biggest thing, I think, the trust, if you're not who you are. Then again, through my journey over time, and there's the sport over here, AFL football, which is a very big sport in Australia, and they've gone down for many years now, this whole idea of like this team values and team building. And my assistant coach had a connection there, and we started down that path. And to this point, we'd often had people come in from business about, you have to think like this and you have to think like that, and there's above the line thinking and below the line thinking and all those sorts of things. And none of it had really resonated with me, because there's always somebody telling us how it should be. You have to do it like this. And I was like, well, why do we have to do it like that? Like, why is that going to work for us? And then we got a guy in from the AFL that we call it team building side of the game. And I guess the penny drop moment for me was when he went around the room. He's like, you know, how many games of experience do you have? And someone, oh, I've had 50 games, and I've had 200 games. And at that stage, we had a player on that team who played the most ever games in the Australian NBL. Like Tony Rollinson, he played like 620 games. And so he finishes all that, and he's like, okay, so there's like, okay, sorry, I missed a bit. At the start of that, there was a question from one of our players, like, because, you know, he opens up, he gives his spiel, and he says, you know, has anyone got any questions? The player puts his hand up, says, yeah, why are you here? You got leading teams on your shirt. Are you here to help us pick a captain, or what? You know, what's the day about? And then he goes around, asks the game's experience, and he said, okay, so there's like 2,500 games of experience in this room, and you guys want me to tell you how to run your team? No wonder you guys can't win anything. And for me, that was the penny drop moment to say, okay, this guy's different. Like, there's something here that's different. And that's where sort of we start to establish the whole process of player-driven team values. And so then, you know, we go through a process of discussing as a team, what do we stand for? How do we want to be seen? What values do we want to expose? What do we all commit to? And because the players have been part of the process, what it then gives you is a framework that you can sort of keep coming back to and utilize to say, you know, well, as a team, and you were part of this discussion, you know, as a team, we said that, you know, we wanted to move the ball, and so I'm just going back to what we agreed to as a group. I'm not saying you're a bad person, Bernis, for taking that shot. I'm not saying you're a bad guy, but as a team, we agreed that that's not the best way for us to play. So you just can keep coming back. You can hold people to account in a different way to the values of the group. And I find that very powerful. And so I guess I've really grown down that path over time. And it's when I present it, there's often the question is, does it feel like the inmates are running the asylum, right? That's often the question that I get. And my answer is, I actually feel that I have a lot more control by giving up control. And there's winning, like, you know, there's by empowering the players to communicate, to take ownership, things get taken care of. Like, it doesn't always have to be the head coach taking care of things. And, you know, there's classic examples of teams that won a championship, and, you know, you're sitting around afterwards having a drink, and some stories start to come out of stuff that I didn't even know. But, you know, someone on the team, or the captain took care of it, or someone else took care of it, or an assistant coach took care of it before it got to be a problem. And so I actually feel like I've got a lot more control by giving up control to the group.
not micromanaging. I mean, there's a lot of points now. I was taking notes as we were talking, and that reminds me of several things. So Ituda said something also where you have to at some point trust the orchestra. Like, you let them do, and you are kind of the director of the whole spiel. But you have to give up the control to trust them, and then you have to bring them up to that point where you can trust them. But the accountability factor also tells me, like, that when you are projecting one single truth on the team, and just only one way of doing it, it will never. It's hardly ever going to work out the way you envision your truth to be. So every team has their own sort of truth, you know, and you reversed it, and by letting the team define the truth that makes them the best possible team they can be. Because each season or each national team, you'd exchange one or two players, it's already a different deal. Like, you change the locker room, basically you change a little bit of the style, maybe a situation has to change, because every player, every personality is different. So every team has a different truth, I believe. And by being flexible, and that's the fascinating thing to me about basketball, that this ability to read and to be flexible and to adjust on the fly, and to see this team needs this, and next year the team needs something else, or maybe 2 months later the team needs something else right now. And that by allowing the team to speak up and to take responsibility on certain topics, on certain situations, it makes your job easier, but also it creates trust between both parties.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's a really good way to summarize it or describe it. And if you're trying to put your truth onto the group, that's what I found is when things go bad, it's easy for everyone just to wash their hands and say, well, this is what you said would work, and this is your way, and I told you it wouldn't work, and so this is all your fault. Whereas if you engage everybody from the start, there's a greater ownership from everybody. It's like so a micro example of that would be you're doing a scouting situation and there's a pin down situation, and you say, okay, we're going to do it like this, and one of the players steps up and says, oh, hang on, I think we should defend it, like we should go over instead of under. My thing normally in that situation is say, you want to do it like that, good, do it, because now they have a responsibility to make that work. Yeah, suddenly they're going to show you that they were right, and I
Exactly.
think, that's a good place to be. But what you need to do is create that environment, and it just doesn't happen. Like, you need to create the environment of trust, and you need to create that environment where players are prepared to step up and say some things. But there is that, I mean, there's the line, right? I say all this, and I've had it before. So I had a young coach come and visit with me back in my New Zealand breaker days. He just got a head coaching job in the second league down, and he came and spent a couple of weeks with us, and we did it. Was really interested in this space and the player empowerment and those sorts of things. And he went away and had all his notes, and he came back the next year to visit. And I said, how'd you go? He said, well, it was interesting because I started down that path, and then after a while, like, because I was always asking the players on their opinion and stuff, that the players thought I didn't know what I was doing. Like, I didn't know the answer, so I kept asking the players what the answer was. So, there's still obviously that piece of you giving them the confidence that you're, as you said before, as the conductor, you have the plan. You're asking for their assistance within the broader plan, but you kind of what you're doing.
Yeah, and to get back on that, like, you have to be yourself. I think, like, it's, as you said, like, the players see through that, see through a facade that you're trying to put on if you're not trying to be yourself. And I think it's a great point that you're making, that you when you realize after reflecting that it was not you, and the coach that you're talking about, he was probably doing it too much of being doing what he saw you do, or what he was trying, and not really playing reading the situation at hand, and realizing that the players are probably needing a little bit more of a direction at some point, or a little bit more of a strict system, and then you let them within that system make a decision, and they're more engaged in that decision because it was their decision, their final decision. My father was doing that when we were coaching in the second division in Germany, and he's considered a player coach, but we were successful because he also had the respect of being a former player, but also because we had guidelines of how to play, what to play. And then in certain situations, it's like, because there was some tricky situations of how you want to guard a certain player in a certain situation, then you have to decide, like, do we gonna go over, do we go under, top lock, or whatever. And then the players are, you can see that the players are kind of like, they feel how they feel on the floor when they guard. They know better of how they feel to fight around the screen, or to see if it's going to be, with this situation, feasible or not. It's realistic. A lot of coaches may be too theoretical, and then you have to listen of the coaches, of the players, and their feel for the situation themselves, if they have that experience of like, this may not work. So then they're more dialed in.
Yeah, for sure. And if the angle of the screen is different in this particular situation, all that, like, the game's dynamic. But for me, it comes down to, at the end of the day, if you can build an environment of trust, that's for me the key thing, is where there's trust within the group, that we can have a free exchange of ideas, that people aren't going to take offense. I'm always saying this because I care ultimately for what's best for the group. I'm telling you this because I care about you, and I want you to do well. So, because when you do well, the group does well. Those sorts of situations. And if you don't spend time on that, I mean, you're never going to build that trust. And so I think, certainly it takes time. It takes effort. It doesn't always, it's not always smooth either. It doesn't always work. I'm sitting here sounding like, you know, it's easy, but it's not. And there's still people that don't get it. I mean, because, you know, teams and individuals, of course, there's players that are worried about their family and their next job and their next contract, and they need certain situations, well, they believe they need certain outcomes in order to look after themselves. And how does that fit within the team dynamic? But at the end of the day, for coaching, for me, it comes down to relationships. And the better you can build your relationships, then the more, like, as a coach, all you can do is influence, right? You can't play. You're not out there playing. All you can do is influence. If you don't have the relationships, if the player doesn't trust you, you can't influence, or your ability to influence is reduced. And so you need to build that environment. And if you can get to a point where a player truly believes and truly trusts that what you want is for him to succeed and to do well, then you have a chance to influence, in my opinion.
The intent is always good. Like, it's good for, the intent is for the good of the player, for the good of the team, and for their future. But like you said, like it starts with the head coach. He has to show that he's also taking responsibility for his own actions. Will was talking about that, where how to build a trusting environment, right? Like we're talking right now. It's probably by being first to admit to your own flaws, to your own mistakes. When you draw up an ATO that was bad, or like there's something that you have to show the players, like you have to be secure with your own the own mistake that you did, and tell them like, yeah, that was me, and please, you know, like that's on me. Like don't worry about it.
We're all human. We all make mistakes.
Exactly. Like
we're
not.
You make mistakes. I make mistakes too. And yeah,
we're
for
not
sure,
robots.
for sure. Yeah, and I think it's interesting in that, again, with the national team, and Luke, you know, you get your piece of your growth from everywhere, right? And Luke Longley was an assistant for me on the national team, and he's a wonderful person, and he's invested a lot in me over time. And he really gets this space well. The connection space, and the being able to build a relationship with people and get them to trust and to understand that you value them. And one of the things with the national team in the early days, like Luke's a big guy in the surf and paddleboarding, and I'm not a great guy in the water and all that. And he kept wanting to get us on the paddleboards and as a team and all that. And he's like, Dre, it's good for you to be vulnerable in front of the players, for you to, you know, to fall over and fall off and look out of your depth and all that. So he said that's a good thing, to expose yourself like that in front of the players. And that was an interesting sort of thing for him to say. And just what you said there, like just with this year with my Japanese team, we had that exact situation. We came flying back in a game, came back from 20 down, fourth quarter, the ball game's on the line with, you know, they score, we get the timeout, we advance, we're like 2 down with 8 seconds to play. I run a just terrible end side out of bounds play, ATO, just terrible. We turn it over, and you know, in the video session on the Monday morning, I was like, fellas, that's me. Like this is me. Like for sure, there's a terrible play for the personnel that we had, bad choice. And then and I think they were a little surprised by that. But then you go into the video. All right, so you know, pick and roll defense. You need to be over here. You know, I made my mistakes. You made your mistakes. Let's all get better.